So now we're doing part 2. We already did part 1, just went over that.
Worksheet part 2.
It's worksheet 12, radical equations part 2. So we're still going to do that square root thing. All right. So let's see if this is any different. Let's see what happens. We'll start off, Jordan. You're not actually, but all I want you to do is be quiet and pay attention. Do you have any paper in front of you? You're gonna write. You're not gonna write anything down. You can't ask anybody for a piece of paper. Okay. Well, then just sit there and do nothing. Then. It's supposed to be an N. Looks weird, but that's an N. All right. What do you think? Well, the first step is the exact same thing that we've been doing on that last worksheet. So what do you think? What's the first step? Yeah, square it. We got to get rid of that square root, right? We just did a whole worksheet where we squared both sides, correct? So this is part 2. What do you think? We're going to do the same thing. Now, it gets a little bit tougher, I think, but let's get into it. So I square this side. That'll get rid of the square root. So what do I do to this side? I square that, okay? Let's see what happens. So this and this cancel out. I'm left with 110 minus n equals n squared. Yeah, they made this harder than I thought they would. Because of the fact, I don't think they went over this stuff on the worksheet. Now, we did this stuff in school. We did this stuff in school. Now, doing the problem's not tough because we've actually done this already. We've been quizzed and tested on it, okay? But I didn't expect this worksheet to, because I didn't do all these problems. I just figured it'd just be a little bit tougher. But I think this is what they're going to do. So let's try it. Let's see how it works. What I would do, you've got an n squared, an n, and a number. You remember doing this stuff when we were in the regular book? What do we call this? Starts with a Q. There's not many things that start with a Q in here. It's a quadratic. Yeah, quadrature. That starts with a Q, but we're doing quadratic. The quadrature formula. That's what we should have called it. Okay, the quadratic. It's not a formula, but it's the what? Equation. We could use the quadratic formula if you wanted to. I'm just actually surprised that this worksheet has you do it this way. Just because I don't remember them having a worksheet. Shh, let me talk. Don't remember them having a worksheet where they did this quadratic equation. But anyway, we've done it in here, so that's fine. But what do we want to make it look like? Remember, we want to make it look like this. ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. You remember that, don't you? We did a lot of that. So let's make this into this. We want to set everything equal to 0, put the x squared first, then the letter, right, which is the n, in the middle, and then just the number that's by itself, we're going to put it over here on the right-hand side. And then we're going to set it equal to 0. So what do we get? We'll keep the n squared positive. So I want to make that left side 0, don't I? So how do I get rid of this minus n? I add an n. So I'm going to add an n. You could do it over here if you wanted to. Let's do it like that, just so I don't confuse you too much. All right, so I could add an n to both sides, correct? I didn't show it. I'll show it. There we go. And then we want to get this 110 over here. How do we get rid of that 110? Subtract 110. All right, so, and then this will all be what? What's over here? Everything canceled out. They all added up to 0, right? So this would be a 0. So let's write it a little bit nicer. Let's write it n squared plus n minus 110 equals what? 0. Okay. So what do you think? What are we going to do here? Could try to factor it, right? Yeah, let's factor it. Let's do it both ways, okay? Just as a review. Can you factor this? So remember what the question is. wasn't that long ago that we did this stuff, okay? I mean, it's been a few weeks, but we did a lot of this. So what number, if I multiply it together, will I get negative 110? And those same two numbers, if I add them up, I'm going to get what? I'm going to get a 1. So what numbers? Did I hear somebody say it? I thought I heard somebody say something. First of all, what's going to go first here?
10 and 11?
And yeah, 10 and 11, right? Because it ends in a 0, doesn't it? So that's the first thing I would try. So 10 goes into it, 10 times 11. If I take a 10 and 11 and one of those is negative, is there any way I can get a 1 out of that? Yeah, if which one was positive. So one's going to be positive, one's going to be negative. Yeah, the 11, confused. I'm explaining every little step. What's confusing about this? You have to look to see what two numbers multiply to be 110. Before that, this part right here?
Yeah.
That was easier than this part right here. What don't you understand? I wanted to get everything on one side and a 0 on the other side. So I kept the n squared over there because it was positive. And then I added an n to both sides, right? We've done that a bunch already just today. And then I subtracted a 110 from both sides. What am I left with over here then? A 0. Then I just switched it around. I just put the n squared plus n minus 110 first, and I put it equal to 0. So all I did was just set everything equal to 0. And then, this is the part that's a little tricky. You got to find out what two numbers multiply to be 110. Well, 110 is not something that just pops in my head, but it does end in a 0, though. So that's my first instinct, okay? It's 11 times 10, right? Is there any way I can get 11 and a 10, and one of them being negative, to add up to be a 1? Sure. Positive 11 and negative 10. So what do? They multiply to be negative 110, and they also do what? Add up to be positive 1, that number right there. Okay, and that was what we wanted to try to do. Okay? Does this come back to you? Yeah, this should be kind of fresh in your mind. Now, what do we do when we had two things multiplied together and your answer was 0? You set them equal to what? 0. Set them both equal to 0. We went through a whole explanation way back when I taught it. So let's set them both equal to 0. So n plus 11 will equal 0. And what else? N minus 10 will equal to 0. So now, it's super easy. Now we just solve for n. Subtract an 11 from both sides. So n equals negative 11. And then we add a 10 to both sides. And we go n equals 10. I'm tempted to circle both of those answers, aren't you?
Oh, you got it.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially with this. All right. Let's write down the original problem. Is that all right?
Okay. Oh no, the original n wasn't squared. We just squared.
Oh, that's right. Thank you. Right, I squared on both sides. Right. That's why I wrote down the original problem, so I wouldn't do that, and I did it anyway. All right. So let's put the 10 in. All right. So what's 110 minus 10?
100.
That's 100. And what is the square? And this should be equal to n, correct? Or what? This should be equal to 10. Is the square root of 100 equal to 10?
Yeah.
It is. 10 equals 10. So can I circle this one?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Let's try it with the other one. All right. So it's what? 110 minus n. What do we say n was right here? Negative 11.
So it's
And that should equal what? Negative 11.
Yeah.
Does it? What's this?
Plus 121.
That's 121 because when we subtract a negative, right, add the opposite. So that's 121. So I don't know the best way to explain this, but on these problems, we're not going to take the positive and the negative version of it. Okay, we're just going to say whatever the positive version is. So what's the positive version of 100 square root of 121?
11.
It's 11, isn't it? Is 11, I'll put a question mark here, is 11 equal to negative 11?
No.
It's not. So does it check?
No.
It doesn't. So is this going to be one of our answers? No. Okay. They give a big fancy word for it. I might have told you that before, but they call it an extraneous. Did I ever say that word? We call it an extraneous solution, which means you did all the work and you came out with an answer that should have worked, right? I did my math right. Everything was fine, but sometimes, especially when square roots, when you square both sides, I don't know if you remember me saying this, when you square both sides, sometimes weird things happen, all right? And you're not going to get every answer that you got right here. Sometimes both of them will work. Sometimes they won't. So you got to check to see when they work, when they don't work. All right, so this doesn't work because we checked it. It doesn't work because positive 11 does not equal negative 11. And then we call this an extraneous solution, this one right here. You don't have to write that, okay? The only reason I even told you this word, because in the instructions, it says solve each equation, but then it also says remember to check for extraneous solutions, right? So you know what that word means. It's a solution that worked in the algebra, but when you put it back in to check it, it doesn't work. Everybody good? And so on this worksheet, there's a lot of problems that you get both answers. And then there's some problems where you only get one answer. Sometimes you only get one, so you do have an extraneous solution. There are some, and we talked about this earlier in the year, sometimes you get two answers, sometimes you get one answer, or sometimes what? You get no answers. There's no solution. So you might do all the work, you do the math correct, but then when you plug them both back in, neither one of them work. All right? So it's kind of weird. So is checking important on this? Absolutely. All right, because you have no idea if you should be getting two answers, one answer, or no answers. And again, if you get no answers, if neither one of them work when you plug them back in, then you just say that's no solution. We'll just stick with that, no solution. Okay? You want to do another one? Now, you could have done this. A lot of you guys, and it's perfectly fine. I have no problem if you do this at all. Okay? You could have taken this thing right here, and instead of doing that factoring thing, what's another way that you could have solved for that, the quadratic formula? So let's go over that. Let's do the same problem, but let's do it with the quadratic formula. Is that all right? All right. So I'll tell you what. Instead of using n, can I use x? Is that all right? So what is it? X squared minus x. What is it? Minus 110? Equals 0. Make sure. It's plus n or plus x. All right. So that's what we ended up with, right? After we did the square both sides and we moved everything over, we came up with this. So let's try to remember what the formula for this is. What is it? Remember this? Negative b. Let's make that look a little nicer. Negative b plus or minus square root. Did I drill this into your head or not? Minus what? Minus 4ac over 2a. That should look familiar, correct? And what did we do over here? Off to the side. You don't always have to do this, but when you're new at this, and we've been away from it for so long, I would say that we're kind of new at this now, wouldn't you? Since we haven't done this in a long time. So I would put the a, b, and c. So what is the a in this situation? Is it x squared? Remember, it's ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. What is the a? The a is not the x squared. Look. Right there. A is not the x squared. What's the x? What's the a right here? It's a 1. It is not an x. This is not an x squared. What's the number out in front of the x squared? It's a 1. Okay, the x squared is not out in front of the x squared. What number is being multiplied by the x squared? A 1 is being multiplied. All right? I mean, that's something you got to see. So anyway, that's a 1. What about this one? What's the b? Same idea. What's the b? It's a 1 because what is being multiplied? See, that b is being multiplied by the x. What's being multiplied by this x? A 1. So the b is also a 1. What is the c? It's negative 110. Okay? So now all we do is plug and chug. We take a, b, and c and plug it into this formula right here. So let's do it. Some people like this to tell you the truth, on that problem that we just did, if it was me personally, I would prefer just to factor it because it factored fairly simply, okay? But there are some problems where you really can't tell. You get some really big, crazy numbers in here, and especially if you have a number out in front of the x squared, I'd probably go right to the formula. So let's do this and see if we get the same thing. This says negative b. Well, b is 1, so what's negative b? It's negative 1, correct? This means the opposite of whatever b was. B was positive 1, so we take the opposite of positive 1, which is negative 1. We're going to put a plus or minus here because we're going to get two answers. And then you do the rest of it. B squared. So it's a 1. What's 1 squared? I can do that in my head. It's 1. Minus 4 times a is 1, times c. Now c is a little weird. It's negative 110. That whole thing is over 2 times a, or 2 times 1, which is just 2. So plugging everything in wasn't that hard. You just have to know what your a, b, and c were. You plug them in for a, b, and c in that formula, and now you just do some arithmetic and you simplify this thing. So let's do that. So I've got negative 1 plus or minus, put that big square root there. Let's simplify the stuff inside the square root. All right, and we may need a calculator. Let me pull out the calculator just so I can do this. I probably could do this in my head, but just want to double check and make sure. Okay, so here we go. We've got 1 minus 4 times 1 times a negative. So I've got two negatives there. What's that going to be? That's going to be positive. All right, 4 times 1, and this is just 440, right? Don't even need to do that on a calculator. So this is going to be 1. Everybody see this? This is 1 plus, what's that? 440. So what is that? 441. Okay, let me try something. Ooh, good. All right, that's over what? 2. Now with this worksheet, I'm looking at it, all the answers, when you do get answers, because there are some with no answers, but when you do get answers, there's no like decimals or fractions, all right? They all come out to a nice whole number or negative whole number, which is an integer. To tell you the truth, now looking at it, yeah, there's one that comes out to a negative, and that's it. Everything else comes out to a whole number, which means they're positive, and there's no fractions or decimals. Yep, there's only one problem that actually comes out negative, all right? So let's do this. You've got negative 1 plus or minus square root. Anybody know 441 square root? It's 21. I did it in my calculator because I wasn't sure. I thought it was, but I wasn't 100% sure. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Keeping me straight here. The square root of 441 is just 21. It's not the square root of 21. Okay, it's just 21. And that's over what? 2. You writing all this down? I got so many people with their heads on the desk. You've given up already. We've barely started, and you've already given up. That's just right. I'm not saying everybody, but you can look around and tell who. All right, so here we go. It's negative 1. What's this plus or minus mean? It means I add a 21 divided by 2, and we got negative 1 what? Minus 21 divided by 2. Let's do this. Negative 1 plus 21 is 20. Over 2 is 10. And that was one of our answers, wasn't it? And we checked it. I'm not going to check it again because we already checked it. All right, and that works. Let's see. All I'm trying to show you is that the quadratic formula will give us the same exact answer as what our factoring would do. What was this? Negative 22 over 2. Lo and behold, look what we get. Negative 11. But when I took that negative 11 and plugged it back in and checked it, it didn't work, correct? So that's an extraneous solution. So I'm not going to use it. So my only answer on that problem right there is that. It's 10. And that's the first one. I don't know if they get really any more difficult, to tell you the truth. There's a bunch. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I didn't really take a great look at this when I printed it out. I just thought it would be a little bit harder than the last one. They made this considerably more difficult with the quadratic. I really didn't think they would do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you, what do you want to do, odds or evens? Let's do the odds. I already did number 1. That's 1 for you, okay? So let's just do the odds. Okay? Nah, we'll just do the odds. Okay, so I'll just give you the odds to do. We got a few more minutes. Let's do a couple more just to kind of get you the swing of these. Do you like factoring, or would you rather do the quadratic formula? Neither is not an option. I think it depends. Yeah, I think Cam's right. Whatever's easier. Sometimes I think factoring is easier. Sometimes I think using the formula is easier. So I am going to pick number 9. Number 9 it's shorter. Does that mean it's easier? I don't know. Maybe. I'll tell you what. Let's not use R. They use all these different letters. I guess that's good. I like X, so we're going to use that. Yes, I just write it nicer, especially with this tablet. It's hard. My handwriting's terrible on this tablet. So, all right, what are we going to do? Everybody take a look. Let's everybody wake up, get your heads up, and pay attention. All right? Still, people aren't putting their heads up. All right, I've done what I can do. It's up to you. If you want to sleep through this and not know how to do it, that's your option, I guess. So what are we going to do here? Square it. That's right. Square both sides because I want to get rid of the square root. So I square this and I square this. Let's see what we get. I get x squared equals, remember that canceled that out, so it's just a 10x. Okay? So what I want to do here is I still want to write it as a quadratic equation. I still want to set it equal to 0. All right? I do not want to divide by an x. Everybody hear me on this? Yeah. I do not want to divide by an x because what that's going to do, that will get rid of one of your potential answers. Okay, if you divide it and get rid of one of the x's, that automatically gets rid of one of your answers. You don't want to do that. So I'm going to put everything on the left-hand side. So if I do that, I get minus 10x, and that's equal to 0. Now in this one, technically you could use the quadratic formula, but I'm not going to because this factoring is even easier than what we did before. This is really not even a trinomial factoring. This is just a greatest common factor. So what's in common with both of these terms right here? There's an x. So I factor out an x, and what am I left with? X minus what? 10. And that's all equal to 0. So that's easy factoring. Y'all like that factoring, right? Just factor out a common factor of x? Sure. And now I got two things multiplied together. My answer is 0. So what am I going to do with both of those? Set them both equal to 0. So set that equal to 0. Set that one equal to 0. I'm not going to circle them yet. When will I circle them? After I check it. That's right. So what can I say x is here? It's 10. So what was our original problem? It was x equals the square root of 10x. All right, so let's put a 0 in. So 0 is one of my potential answers. Remember, I could get 2 answers, I could get 1 answer, or I could get no answers. So let's put that in here. Put in a 0 equals the square root of 10 times 0. Does that work? Yeah. What's 10 times 0? What's the square root of 0? So does 0 work? Absolutely. I'll circle it. Let's try one more. Let's try x is 10. So I'm going to put 10 equals the square root. See, I'm just putting in a 10 in for this and a 10 in for that. So 10 equals the square root of 10 times what? 10. All right, let's see if it works. 10, that should equal, or hopefully it equals, what's this? The square root of what? 100. What's the square root of 100? It's 10. Does 10 equal 10? Of course it does. So I can circle them both. So on this problem, I get 2 answers. I get x equals 0 and x equals 10. If this was on a test, you need to have both answers. You can't just have one. Okay? Let's do one where there's no solutions. I'm curious, aren't you? You guess? Yeah, let's do that. So let's do, I'll pick an odd one. Let's see, is there an odd one? Yeah. 23 is an odd one that has no solution. 23. So how many of this have I done for you? This is the third one now? Okay. So, and this is negative. Oh, they use an m, but I'm going to use an x again. Plus 10 equals x. All right. Now, this definitely has an extra step to it. I can see it already. What's the first thing we do? So far, today, every single first step that we've done, even when we went over yesterday's homework, was to square both sides, correct? Okay, but say it, Kim. Yeah, let's get the 4 out. Good, okay? Move the 4 over to the other side. How do I move that positive 4 to the other side? Yeah, subtract a 4, right? We did that on the last worksheet. We did it several times on the last worksheet. So I subtract a 4 from that, okay? Now, I'll tell you what, instead of writing everything over again, I'm just going to do that. Is that all right? Now what can I do? Now I can get rid of the square root. How do I get rid of the square root? I square it, but you got to be careful. Here's where you got to be careful. Hope you're watching. You got to square that whole entire side. Oh, no, you're right. I got to square the whole entire side. And it's not just x squared minus 4 squared. You got to take the whole thing, put in parentheses, and square it. So what do we get? We get negative 3x. Run a little short on time, so let's go a little quicker. What does this mean when you square something? You multiply it by itself. And you're right. I heard FOIL. That's what we do. So let's see what we get. First, outside, inside, last. Aren't you glad we learned this stuff earlier? So x squared minus 4x minus 4x. Can we do that in our head?
Yeah.
What? No, minus 4 minus 4.
0.
What's minus 4 minus 4? Somebody, please, give me hope.
0.
It's negative 8. Oh, my goodness. It's negative 8x. And now, let's multiply the last terms together. Now you can say it. What is it? Positive 16. Okay? Now, what we want to do, all right, that's not new. I mean, we've done that this year before a bunch of times. What we want to do is get everything on one side, set it equal to 0. So I'm going to add a 3x to both sides. And then I'm going to subtract a 10 from both sides. That should be something that you see right away. That's 0, so that's a 0. And what do we get? X squared. It's negative 8x plus 3x, which is negative 5x. And what's that? It's plus 6, correct? I always like to, I don't know why, a little OCD about it, I guess. I don't think I'm officially diagnosed as OCD, but I'm a little picky. Let's say it that way. I'm just a little picky, and I like this over here. Now, you could use the quadratic formula, but if you look at this, this is actually pretty easy to factor. Do you see it?
Yeah.
I would give you time to look at it, but we're running out of time. What two numbers multiply to be a positive 6, and the same exact two numbers add up to be a negative 5? Yeah, negative 3, right, and negative 2. They multiply to be positive 6, and they add up to be negative 5. So what do we do with both of these? Set them equal to 0. I want to get to the part where we check it, all right? So x is 3 and x is 2. Look, we did all the math right. We did the factoring. We did everything right. But we still have to figure out if this works. Let's put it into the original equation. This is the original equation, negative 3x plus 10. And that should equal x. Let's see if it does. Let's put a 3 in for this. Did the screen? My screen went. So I don't have my battery plugged in. Oh, what's this one? There we go. My screen went dark. Now it's bright. Okay. So let's put it in. Let's put a 3 in for this. So I've got a 4 plus square root. Let's do this in our head. This is negative 3 times 3, which is what? Negative 9 plus 10 is a 1, right? The square root of 1 is 1 plus 4 is 5. Does 5 equal 3?
No.
Of course not. I'll put a question mark. It doesn't. So that doesn't work. Okay? Let's put a 2 in and see if a 2 works. So 4 plus square root. Put a 2 in for this. Negative 3 times 2 is negative 6 plus 4 gave it away. Negative 6 plus 10 is 4. What's the square root of 4? It's 2. 2 plus 4 is 6. Does 6 equal 2? Question mark. No, it doesn't. So that doesn't work. So no solution. No solution. And I showed my work. Look at all that work I had to show. I had to do all that stuff to get the answer. And then I had to do all this stuff to check to see if my answer was right. All right, so do not turn this in with just a bunch of answers on it, because I will put a 0. In fact, I should probably put a negative and take points off of your grade is what I should do.
-10.
I won't do that, but I will give you a 0 if all you do is turn that in with a bunch of answers written on it. Okay?
You call it extra.
All right. Well, that was a little tougher.
Like this guy.
That wasn't exactly back to the basics. And this is from, listen, shh. I mean, not to make you feel bad or anything, but this is actually from an Algebra 1 curriculum with the worksheet. So I took this from an Algebra 1 curriculum. All right. So they do teach this in Algebra 1. Some teachers do. I don't think I ever taught that much in Algebra 1. I can't remember. Anyway, that's it. Here's your worksheet right here. Can you pass those out? Get the worksheet from Cam. You only have to do, which ones do you have to do? Just the odds.